to you, and we really appreciate making time for this engagement. I always value engagement with members of the Fourth Estate because you are extremely important for the deepening and the consolidation of our constitutional democracy. In every real sense, you shape national discourse, you shape the national narrative. And so there is a huge responsibility that rests on you when you do that. And I would sincerely hope that you would not take that responsibility lightly, because you have to inform, you have to educate our public, you have to help them make sense of our society. And in every respect, people read newspapers, they listen to the news, they follow social media. I know the competition with the social media, that there's always a danger about a true and authentic story when everyone becomes a journalist. But I personally rely heavily on print media and on radio and TV, because I trust journalists to be competent and able to sift through all the unnecessary things and inform us. So I really thank you for that. But secondly, I should indicate that I'm a member of the board of the Freedom of Expression. And so I prize highly the privilege and the right pertaining to the freedom of expression. So thank you to both of you. There are specific matters that were flagged, and I haven't prepared any script, so I will just comment more generally on some of the issues which were flagged. And I think the first one that was mentioned was in relation to challenges facing higher education in South Africa. There are many challenges that face the higher education system in this country, but it is also important to understand that in the African continent, we have the best higher education system, and it is really second to none. And so one has to look at some of these challenges in the proper perspective. But that said, there are some really, really significant challenges. Let me just touch on some of them. The first one, of course, has to do with the actual funding of higher education. As a nation, we are not investing adequately in higher education, particularly as it pertains to research and innovation. Compared to other countries, OECD countries, we invest a tiny fraction of our GDP in research. That, of course, has an impact on the amount and our ability to contribute to the global stock of knowledge, to innovation. And so while there are some areas which are quite good in South Africa, and one has to acknowledge that, there are fields in which we are excellent as the public higher education system in this country, but the level of investment in research and innovation is insignificant. And we do need to, as a nation, invest in higher education. I'm just proud, though, that despite the fact that we are a middle-income country, one would have thought that the greatest investment would be aimed at dealing with the here and now, the daily challenges and so on, which we do, but we also invest in research that is forward-looking. Take the case of the square kilometer array. People might have asked questions why we would invest in something so, I don't know, it does not understand the poverty, unemployment, and so on. But it was during the tenure of Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor that we actually played an important role in the SKA. But I'm also proud that the lead scientist from South Africa part was a professor at Rhodes University, Professor Justin Jonas. And he was the key person from South Africa in driving the SKA, which is the biggest radio telescope to have been built on Earth. Part of it is in Australia, and some of it is in other different parts, but we really have the biggest chunk of it, and we have already developed prototypes. And if you go to Northern Cape, you will see these radio antenna, which are a precursor to the big thing. So that is important, but that should not negate the fact that we need to invest more in research. Second, very important challenge for higher education relates to student debt. That is a separate matter, but I think I should just touch on it now. There is an ever-escalating student debt in this country. At the moment, it sits close to 17 billion rand, if not more. I'll indicate why this is important. Just last year alone, student debt was about 900 million rand. And I'll explain to you how that came about. So, student debt has a huge impact on universities, on their sustainability, but also just the stability of the higher education sector. So somehow we need to address the issue of student debt. What is particularly heartbreaking, though, is that students who owe debt to universities do not get their certificate when they graduate. Universities withhold those so that they can recoup the money owed. But of course, it makes it very difficult for them, because if I don't have my passment and I'm able to get a job, then I won't be able to pay back the debt. But I think universities are caught in a rather difficult situation, because if they issue the student certificate, there's no guarantee that money will be paid. So most universities have an arrangement to the effect that if a student who has graduated, who has a debt and has their passment withheld, can indicate to the prospective employer that they have completed, and ask the prospective employer to contact the university to confirm that the student has actually graduated, and in that interaction with the prospective employer, enter into some kind of payment arrangement for the student to settle the debt. But there are many young people who have not been able to secure employment because of the debt that they owe and the fact that they don't have their passment with them. As a prospective employer, if you have 4 applicants, one with complete application material, including their passment and so on, you have another good person, and you don't have the confirmation of having completed the qualification, that places the one without a passment at a disadvantage. So it really is a huge challenge which we need to address. So student debt is causing huge problems regarding employment for our students or for our graduates. Last year's debt grew quite significantly because of the changes that NSFAS implemented. And maybe I should just talk about NSFAS at the moment, because NSFAS is a real risk to the public higher education system in this country. It's a scheme that was intended to alleviate the plight of the poor and working class young people, giving them funding in order to access education. But the way that the scheme has operated has created more problems than solved. One, last year, they implemented accommodation fee capping. Basically said, we are not going to pay more than 45,000 Rand for a student living in a res, in a university res, or anywhere. They are not paying more than that. Now, that has had huge ramifications, particularly I can talk about Rhodes University, but other universities as well. You see, university accommodation is really important for students, not only to have roof over and food and so on, but to be on campus, access to facilities, access to Wi-Fi, and all of these things that are essential for them to succeed. Now, because of the capping, they are not able to live on campus because they can't afford the difference between what the university is charging and what NSFAS is prepared to pay, because that is a debt on the student. And so we are seeing many young people living university accommodation, looking for off-campus accommodation in places that are unsuitable for study, far away from campus, and not only in terms of distance, but in terms of their own safety. Library closes, let's say at 11 o'clock, they have to find their way deep into the township where they would have rented a backyard room, which is completely and wholly unsuitable. And some of these students have to take some of their allowances and send them back home to support their families. And that should indicate the level of poverty in this country. The little that they get in the way of allowances is repatriated to support siblings and their family. And in the process, these young people are making it difficult for themselves to study and complete their studies in the shortest possible time. So it's really an invidious position that they find themselves in. We have engaged NSFAS on this, but there is no solution in sight. As if capping off accommodation was not enough, they engaged 4 fintech companies to disburse the allowances. You would have been aware that the board of NSFAS was dissolved by the previous minister, and the contracts with the fintech companies are being contested at the moment. So there's an administrator. The allowances are currently being disbursed by universities. But of course, the fintech companies are they're really going to court to ensure that those contracts are not stopped. Okay, so that is the second thing pertaining to student debt. The third very important challenge of higher education in this country is in respect of the aging staff profile. We have highly productive academics and researchers who are reaching retirement age, and we are not seeing significant numbers of young people pursuing careers in academia. And if you can't have staff, then you will be in huge trouble. Coupled with the aging staff profile, we are losing staff through emigration. People who are leaving this country for other countries, and they are living in big numbers. That coupled with the difficulties with home affairs in us recruiting staff from other parts of the world, it is a nightmare. If you need to employ someone from elsewhere, South Africa is not an inviting country. And of course, sometimes the people come with their spouses and you can't get employment for them. So on the staffing side, that is a big problem, that we are losing staff through retirement and emigration, and we are not replenishing those. The fourth issue regarding higher education is again in relation to funding. At the moment, NSFAS funds students from poor and working class backgrounds. We don't have any affordable and financial sustainable mechanism of funding young people we refer to as the missing middle. Those who are too rich to qualify for NSFAS, in other words, their family income is above the NSFAS threshold, which is 350,000 Rand, and are not rich enough to can afford university education. Those are missing middle students. We are still to come up with a financially sustainable mechanism to support those, but also to support postgraduate students. At the moment, if a person has been funded by NSFAS for their undergraduate studies and wish to proceed to postgraduate studies, there is no funding scheme that they can tap into. And the fact that the person was funded by NSFAS for undergrad is clearly out of a recognition that they are financially needy. They come from poor families. But then there is no funding beyond undergraduate. But that I understand, because you want to afford as many people as possible just to get that first degree. But we still have to come up with a scheme. It could be a combination of bursary and loan and so on that will make it possible for those students to go beyond undergrad studies, because these days you do need an honors or a master's to succeed. The next thing which I think is important with the higher education system is in regards to maintenance. Maintenance of the infrastructure, the buildings, and that is very, very costly. With funding ever so much in short, we don't have enough money to do the necessary maintenance of our infrastructure, the buildings, and just the facilities. And linked to that, and also linked to the issue of research, we don't have enough funds to buy research equipment. Some of the most important research equipment is too expensive for many universities. Maybe the final thing that I can mention regarding challenges facing higher education and it's something that impacts, and one may not think much about it. The release of the National Senior Certificate results, that's matric results. Some of you might know who are older. We know that results used to be released in December, before the end of the calendar year. And then I think it was in 2000 that the results were released in January, beginning of January. Since then, the release date has been pushed further and further into January. The impact of that is that the start of the academic year for most universities is hugely impacted. And of course we also have our own share of greed, corruption, and malfeasance, particularly when it relates to governance, where you have members of council who enmesh themselves in various processes in universities like procurement, and they have interest in that. And you will be aware of the situation at the University of Fort Hare, and the extent to which the life of the Vice-Chancellor has been threatened, and people have died. It all has to do with corruption, greed, and the malfeasance that is there in our country. And maybe finally, because there are so many of these challenges, finally I should indicate that some of the social ills that we see in our society manifest themselves in universities, such as gender-based violence. And I think, I always want to think that universities would model the best that a society can be. And this idea that universities are a microcosm of society does not appeal to me, because in a way we want to accept that the social ills that are there in our society, we should expect them in higher education institutions. My view is no. Universities, by their nature, should model what is best that a society can be. But certainly we do have these, and they manifest themselves, and we need to deal with them, and deal with them decisively, so that when these young people graduate, they can ensure that we stamp out gender-based violence, rape, and sexual harassment, and the like. So let me stop there insofar as there are many challenges in higher education. I've just mentioned a few. Student debt, I've touched on student debt, and it is something that worries me hugely, because you can't have a situation where a young person goes through the higher education system, completes his or her studies, and is unable to get a job. And then there has been an uptick in unemployment of graduates. And partly that is the reason, and of course partly it's just the economy not developing and generating enough jobs to absorb these young people. I've touched on the National Student Financial Aid Scheme and some of the challenges associated with it. The next thing that I should touch on rather briefly is in respect of the name of our university, Rhodes University. This re-emergence is largely out of public address that was made by Mr. Julius Malema, who came to Rhodes University and raised the issue of the name and suggested that it be changed. Look, in 2015 and 2016, there was a thoroughgoing consultation across all stakeholders of Rhodes University regarding the name of the university. And after a very detailed and thorough process, the final decision was to retain the name of the university. Alumni were consulted, students who were there then were consulted, and there was a broad consultation. And people decided that the university should retain its name. And of course, we do have processes, and if anyone would like to reopen that debate, there are processes to do that. And so I'm not going to engage that further because it's something that is important, and we do have ways of dealing with it if anyone wishes to bring it up again. But Council took that decision after that extensive consultation. The final issue that I want to address relates to global human rights concerns. The world has become extremely complex, and there are so many of these human rights issues at a personal level, and I really can only speak at a personal level. These are extremely concerning. The one that is of immense concern to me is in relation to the situation in Gaza. The situation there with the deaths of innocent civilians and children and the destruction of property is something that should concern all of us. It's really a stain on our collective conscience as humanity. The bombardment and the destruction of life and the scale of that is something that should not be countenanced. And the world is simply watching and doing little and to nothing. And it's really, really ironic that this happens in the Holy Land. The Holy Land has become a place of unimaginable destruction of life. And so I sincerely hope that sanity will prevail, that there could be a quick ceasefire, and that those who have influence on the various role players can appeal to their good side. You can't exterminate a population. You can't kill an idea. Killing babies, pulling them out of oxygen tubes and so on, and destroying hospitals and institutions of learning will not solve the problem. So my own view is, and my own plea is that those who have access to the warring parties could really appeal to their better self and implement a ceasefire and ensure that the hostages are released, and that a conducive environment is created for the different parties to come together and work out how they can coexist. Because it really has to be coexistence. I know that most people see the genesis of the current destruction of life and property purely as starting from the 7th of October. No, this goes way back. And so I really hope that a ceasefire can be reached soon. And of course, there are other areas of concern, Sudan and elsewhere. And one is always confronted with whataboutism. When you raise one issue and you say, but what is happening in Gaza is unacceptable, and it is a failure of global governance, where Israel can just completely ignore the United Nations, the International Court of Justice. And by the way, I'm very proud of what this country did to highlight the atrocities committed in Israel. But of course, the whataboutism would immediately be, well, why are you raising concerns about this situation in Gaza? What about Ukraine? What about Sudan? What about that? All of those need to be resolved. But the scale of human destruction and the loss of life is completely out of proportion to what happened on the 7th of October. And when people move to what is supposed to be safe areas and they are bombed, carpet bombing, there's absolutely no safe place in that part of the world. And so I really am very frustrated that we are not moving with a sense of speed and purpose to address the challenge that is there, which is a complete obliteration of the Palestinians. Yeah, let me stop there.